In the heart of Igbo land, nestled between hills and thick forests, there was a peaceful village called Umuokoro. The villagers lived simple lives, farming and trading. They followed their customs and traditions faithfully, as their ancestors had done for many generations. One of the traditions that was very important to them was a rule that many believed was fair, but few could understand fully. It stated that if a young married man dies suddenly, his wife must drink the water used to bathe his corpse to prove her innocence. This tradition had been passed down for centuries, and although it was often a sad and horrifying moment, it was believed that only the purest and most innocent woman could survive the trial. If she was guilty, the spirits would punish her, and she would die. If she was innocent, the water would have no power over her, and she would live to tell her story. The villagers believed this was the only way to uncover the truth. Nena was a beautiful, strong, and kind-hearted woman. She had been married to her husband, Okechukwu, for only 2 years, but they were deeply in love. Okechukwu, a hard-working and brave young man, was known for his generosity and sense of justice. He was the pride of the village, and everyone believed he would live a long, prosperous life. But one fateful morning, Okechukwu was found dead in his hut. There were no signs of illness, no wounds, and no reason to explain his sudden death. The villagers were confused and terrified. The elders called for an emergency meeting, and after a long discussion, they declared that the tradition must be followed. Nena would have to drink the water used to bathe her husband's body. Nena was devastated. She could not believe what she was hearing. Her heart broke, not only because her husband was gone, but because she was now accused of something she had not done. The thought of drinking the water from his body filled her with fear and disgust. She couldn't understand how this tradition could be so cruel, but she knew that if she refused, she might be seen as guilty. The elders told Nena to prepare herself for the trial. She would be taken to the river where her husband's body would be bathed by the elders. Then, she would have to drink the water used to cleanse his body. If she survived, she would be considered innocent. If she died, the spirits of the ancestors would have judged her as guilty. Nena could not sleep the night before the trial. She spent hours staring at the moon, thinking of her husband. What had happened to him? Why did he die so suddenly? She wondered if the guards had abandoned her. She prayed for guidance, but deep down, she felt helpless. She loved Okechukwu with all her heart, and the thought of him being gone forever was unbearable. On the morning of the trial, the entire village gathered by the river. The elders had already prepared the sacred water for the ritual. Nena stood with her head bowed, her heart racing as she watched them place Okechukwu's body on the ground. The atmosphere was heavy with silence, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The chief elder, a wise and respected man named Ezenwakinemia, stood at the front. His face was stern as he spoke. Nena, daughter of this land, you are accused of causing the death of your husband. The spirits have called for this trial, and you must prove your innocence. Nena nodded, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what to say. How could she prove her innocence when she had no idea what had happened to her husband? She had been with him the night before, and he had seemed fine. He had spoken of plans for the future, plans they would share together. Now, all of that seemed like a distant dream. The elders began their ritual, carefully washing Okechukwu's body. Nena stood by, unable to look away from the lifeless form of her husband. Her heart ached with every movement they made. She had never imagined that her love for him would end like this. The village watched in silence, waiting for what would happen next. When the body was finally washed, the elder poured the water into a large bowl and handed it to Nena. Drink. Nena, drink the water to prove your innocence, he said, his voice echoing in the quiet air. Nena's hands trembled as she reached for the bowl. The water was cold, and it seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. But it was not the water that scared her, it was what the water represented. Nena closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and lifted the bowl to her lips. Her heart raced as she remembered the stories her grandmother had told her about the trial. She had always thought it was a myth, a story to scare children. But now, it was her reality. The water felt heavy in her hands, and her mind was filled with questions. Why was she being forced to do this? What had happened to Okechukwu? As she drank the water, a strange feeling washed over her. It was as though she was drinking not just the water, but the pain and sorrow of everyone who had ever been accused in this ritual. She could feel the weight of their suffering, the fear that had gripped their hearts. But she also felt something else, a spark of defiance. She would not let this trial break her. The villagers watched in silence as Nena drank the last drop of water. The chief elder waited for a moment before speaking again. If the spirits have found you guilty, you will fall dead. If you are innocent, you will live. The air seemed to hold its breath as everyone waited for what would happen next. At first, nothing happened. Nena stood there, feeling the cold water settle in her stomach. Her heart beat loudly in her chest, and she could hear nothing but the sound of her own breath. For a moment, she thought she had survived. But then, something strange happened. She began to feel dizzy. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, and she stumbled forward. "Nena!" A voice cried out from the crowd. It was her mother-in-law, Nika. She ran forward, but the elders held her back. Nena's body shook as she fell to the ground, her breath coming in short gasps. The villagers gasped in horror. Was she guilty? Was this the punishment of the gods? But just as the crowd began to murmur, Nena's eyes snapped open. She sat up quickly, startling everyone around her. She was not dead. She was alive. The water had not killed her, and yet something was terribly wrong. Her body was trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper. Nena looked around at the stunned villagers. "It was not me," she whispered. "It was not me who killed Okichukwu. Someone else did." The words echoed in the still air, and for a moment, no one moved. The villagers were shocked. What did she mean? The chief elder stepped forward, his face twisted with suspicion. "What do you mean, Nena? Are you saying your husband was murdered?" he asked, his voice sharp. Nena nodded slowly, her eyes filled with pain and determination. "Yes, Okichukwu was murdered, but I don't know who did it." The villagers murmured in confusion. "But how could this be?" One of the elders asked. "The spirits do not lie. If you were guilty, you would have died." Nena's eyes blazed with anger. "I do not know what happened, but I know my husband did not die of sickness or natural causes. Someone killed him. I will find out who it was." The elders stared at her in disbelief. How could she speak like this after surviving the trial? Nena's words had cast doubt on everything. The village was thrown into chaos. The elders held another meeting, but this time they were divided. Some believed Nena, while others insisted that the spirits had already spoken. But Nena was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The next few days were filled with tension. Nena secretly began her investigation. Speaking to those who had been closest to Okichukwu, she spoke to his friends, his family, and even the village healers. Slowly, she began to uncover a terrible secret. Okichukwu had made enemies, powerful ones who would stop at nothing to see him fall. Nena's suspicions were growing, and she knew that the truth was closer than ever. In the end, Nena discovered that Okichukwu had been poisoned by a jealous rival who wanted to take his place as the village leader. With this knowledge, Nena returned to the village council and confronted the elder, who had always opposed her husband. The truth came to light, and the guilty man was cast out of the village. Nena had not only survived the trial, but had also avenged her husband's death. She became a hero in her village, a symbol of strength and justice. The tradition, once seen as absolute, was now questioned, and a new dawn began in Umuokoro. Nena's revelation sent shockwaves through Umuokoro. The village had always trusted the wisdom of their elders, but now, a new question arose in everyone's mind. How could they continue to follow a tradition that could be used as a tool of manipulation, as it had been in this case? The trial, once seen as an absolute means of proving innocence, was now clouded with doubt. Many villagers began to whisper about Nena's bravery and her fight for justice. Some said she had been touched by the gods, others called her a hero. The truth was undeniable. She had uncovered a conspiracy that could have cost her life. As word of Nena's success spread, visitors from neighbouring villages came to Umuokoro to witness the woman who had defied the guards and the elders. They were eager to hear her story and learn how she had uncovered the truth. Nena became an inspiration to many, especially to young women, who saw in her the courage to stand up for what was right. Her actions had broken the silence that surrounded certain dark corners of the village. No longer would the people of Umuokoro be bound by a tradition that led them to fear the very rituals meant to protect them. But even as Nena was celebrated, There were those who did not share the same admiration for her. Some of the elders felt embarrassed and threatened by the revelation of their misjudgment. Chief Ezenwakanemiya, though outwardly gracious in his acceptance of Nena's victory, secretly simmered with anger. He was one of the few who still believed in the strict adherence to the old ways. His pride as a leader had been tarnished by what had happened, and he saw Nena as a challenge to his authority. Late one night, Chief Ezenwakanemiya called for a secret meeting of the village elders. In the dim light of their council hut, he looked around at the faces of his colleagues. "What happened with Nena was no accident," he said, his voice low and steady. "She has brought shame upon us all. We cannot allow this to happen again. We must remind the people of the power we hold, and we must reclaim our authority. There is still a way to make things right." The other elders nodded, some reluctantly, others with a glint of agreement in their eyes. The elders devised a plan to take back control. They knew that Nena had become too powerful, too influential. If they did not act, the people might begin to question all of their customs. The next day, they summoned Nena to another meeting, one that would change the course of her life once again. As Nena entered the meeting place, she noticed the coldness in the eyes of the elders. This was not going to be the warm welcome she had hoped for. Something was wrong. "Nena, daughter of the land, we have come to a decision," Chief Ezenwakanemiya began, his voice stern. "While we acknowledge your bravery in uncovering the truth about your husband's death, you must also understand that the traditions of this land cannot be easily dismissed. We have decided that you will take part in another trial. This time, however, you will prove your loyalty to the village and the guards. If you succeed, you will be allowed to live in peace. If you fail, you will suffer the consequences." Nena's heart sank. Another trial? She had already passed the first one, had already proven her innocence, and exposed the truth. Yet here she was, being forced into another test. This time not because of any wrongdoing, but because the elders were afraid of losing their power. The tension in the room was palpable as the elders waited for her response. Nena took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She had come this far, and she would not back down now. She was not afraid of the trial. She had faced death and lived, but she had learned something very important in her journey. Sometimes, the hardest fight is not against your enemies but against the system that holds you down. "What is this trial you speak of?" Nena asked, her voice steady but firm. The elders exchanged glances, and then Chief Ezenwakanemiya spoke again. "You must travel into the dark forest to the shrine of the guards. There, you will spend 3 nights alone, with no food or water. You will be tested by the spirits. If you return alive, you will be considered loyal to the guards and the village. If you fail, it will prove that you have turned against the very essence of this land." The room fell silent. A chill ran through Nena's spine. The dark forest was a place of mystery and fear. It was said that those who entered the forest were sometimes lost forever, swallowed by the spirits that roamed its depths. No one had ever survived alone in the forest for 3 nights. The very thought of it made Nena's skin crawl, but she knew that if she refused, she would lose everything she had worked for the truth, her dignity and her place in the village. "I accept," Nena said, her voice unwavering. "I will go to the forest and prove that my loyalty to the guards is true, but I will not do this out of fear. I will do it because I know that the guards are not cruel. They are just, and they will see the truth as I see it." The elders nodded, though their expressions were unreadable. Chief Ezenwakanemiya gave a curt nod, and the meeting ended. The villagers were told of the new trial, and many came to Nena's side to offer her support. Some offered her food and prayers, while others whispered doubts. But Nena remained resolute. She was not afraid of the forest, nor of the spirits. She was afraid of nothing except the loss of the truth. The day she left for the forest, the entire village gathered to watch. Nena, dressed in a simple gown, walked slowly toward the edge of the village, where the dark forest began. Her heart was heavy, but her steps were determined. The village watched in silence, knowing that her journey would either solidify her status as a hero or condemn her forever. No one knew what would happen. As Nena entered the forest, the air grew thick with tension. The trees were tall, their branches twisting like the fingers of ancient spirits. The path was narrow and overgrown, and it seemed to swallow her whole as she ventured deeper into the shadows. The sounds of the village faded, replaced by the eerie whispers of the forest. On the first night, Nena sat by a small fire, her thoughts racing. She wondered about the trial, the village, and the future. She could feel eyes watching her. But whenever she looked around, there was nothing. The spirits of the forest were testing her, she knew it. She must remain calm and strong. On the second night, the forest grew colder. Strange sounds echoed through the trees' growls, footsteps, and whispers that sent chills down her spine. Nena did not sleep. She stayed awake, watching the darkness, waiting for whatever the spirits had in store for her. On the third and final night, something happened that Nena did not expect. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, with a glowing presence. It was the spirit of Okichukwu, her late husband. He stood before her, his face serene but sorrowful. "Nena," he whispered, "you have been tested not by the spirits of the forest, but by the truth within your heart. You have shown that you are loyal not to tradition, but to justice. The gods have seen your courage." With those words, the spirit of Okichukwu faded into the night. Nena knew that she had passed the trial not by surviving the forest, but by staying true to herself. The truth had set her free, and it had given her the strength to overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. When Nena returned to the village, the people gathered around her, waiting to see what had happened. She was alive, and there was a new light in her eyes. The elders, seeing the truth in her unwavering spirit, had no choice but to accept her as their leader. Jives Nwakenemia, who had once tried to undermine her, now saw the wisdom in her defiance. Nena became a symbol of change for Umuokoro. She led her people with fairness and courage, never afraid to question tradition when it stood in the way of justice. And as the years passed, the village slowly transformed. The harsh traditions that had once ruled their lives were now seen in a new light, and the people of Umuokoro began to follow a path that honored both the old ways and the new truths. And so, Nena's legacy lived on. A reminder that sometimes, to find the truth, you must be willing to face your greatest fears and defy the traditions that bind you. Her journey had started with a trial, but it had ended with a victory for justice, for truth, and for the future of Umuokoro.